In the 1950s and 60s, the CIA operated a network of brothels in San Francisco and New York. They furnished apartments with two-way mirrors. They hired prostitutes to lure unsuspecting men. Then, without consent or knowledge, they secretly dosed these men with LSD and other drugs while CIA agents watched from behind the mirrors, documenting everything. The code name: Operation Midnight Climax. And it was just one part of the CIA's massive mind control program that would become one of the agency's darkest secrets. His name was George Hunter White, a former narcotics agent, a man who described himself as a son of a bitch, a heavy drinker who loved martinis and danger. In 1955, the CIA recruited him for a special assignment: test LSD and other mind-altering drugs on unwitting American citizens to develop interrogation techniques and potential mind control methods. White's job was simple: set up safe houses that looked like normal apartments, recruit prostitutes to bring in subjects, dose them with drugs, and observe the results. Everything would be documented: film, photographs, detailed notes. The subjects would never know. The prostitutes would be paid and protected, and the CIA would get the data they needed for whatever dark purposes they had planned. What could possibly go wrong? George White was given a budget, immunity from prosecution, and essentially unlimited power. He rented apartments in San Francisco's Telegraph Hill and Greenwich Village in New York. He decorated them like upscale bachelor pads: modern furniture, full bars, mood lighting. He installed two-way mirrors in bedrooms and living rooms. Behind those mirrors, he set up observation posts with cameras, recording equipment, and comfortable chairs where CIA officers could watch for hours. Then he recruited the women, prostitutes mostly. Some knew they were working for the government. Some thought they were just working for a wealthy client. All were told to bring men back to the apartments, give them drinks, and let nature take its course. What they weren't always told was that the drinks were spiked with LSD, sometimes in doses far beyond what researchers today would consider safe or ethical. This wasn't a rogue operation. This was an official CIA program, funded through the technical services staff, part of the larger MKUltra mind control project. And what happened in those apartments would violate every principle of medical ethics, human dignity, and constitutional rights. To understand Operation Midnight Climax, you need to understand the paranoia of the 1950s. The Cold War was at its peak. The Korean War had just ended, and American POWs had returned with disturbing stories. Some had made confessions that seemed impossible, admissions of war crimes, denunciations of America, apparent conversions to communism. The military and CIA became convinced that the Soviets and Chinese had developed advanced brainwashing techniques. Terms like thought reform and menticide appeared in intelligence reports. There were fears, mostly unfounded, that communist nations could turn American soldiers, spies, even ordinary citizens into programmed agents through drugs, hypnosis, and psychological torture. The CIA's response was Project MKUltra, approved in 1953 by director Allen Dulles. The goal: develop mind control techniques that could match or exceed whatever the communists supposedly had. The project would eventually encompass 149 sub-projects involving universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. The budget was hidden in the CIA's black budget. Congressional oversight was non-existent. The LSD connection. In the early 1950s, LSD was still a relatively new drug. Albert Hofmann had first synthesized it in 1938 and discovered its psychedelic properties in 1943. By the 1950s, psychiatric researchers were exploring its potential therapeutic uses. Some believed it could treat alcoholism, depression, and other mental illnesses. But the CIA saw different potential. What if LSD could break down a subject's will during interrogation, make someone tell the truth involuntarily, create false memories, or erase real ones? Make someone susceptible to suggestion or control. Serve as a truth serum, better than sodium pentothal. To answer these questions, they needed test subjects. Lots of them. But after the Nuremberg trials and the establishment of medical ethics codes, you couldn't legally test powerful psychoactive drugs on people without their knowledge and consent. Unless those people were considered expendable, unless you could claim national security, unless you operated in complete secrecy. Enter George White. George Hunter White was perfect for the job. Born in 1908, he'd been a journalist, then joined the Federal Bureau of Narcotics in 1934. He was tough, unscrupulous, and willing to bend or break rules. During World War II, he'd worked for the OSS, CIA's predecessor, training agents in surreptitious entry and other black bag operations. After the war, he returned to narcotics work but maintained CIA contacts. When the agency needed someone to run a program that involved drugs, deception, and potentially illegal activities, White was the obvious choice. He had law enforcement experience, intelligence training, and most importantly, no apparent qualms about the ethics of what he'd be doing. In his own words, from a letter he wrote to his CIA handler, "I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" This was the man the CIA put in charge of doozing American citizens with LSD. But how exactly did Operation Midnight Climax work? The operational details are as disturbing as they are bizarre. George White set up his first safe house in Greenwich Village, New York, in 1955. But the operation really took off when he moved to San Francisco later that year. The San Francisco location. The primary safe house was at 225 Chestnut Street in San Francisco's Telegraph Hill neighborhood. White rented a multi-room apartment and transformed it into what looked like a sophisticated bachelor pad. But every detail had a purpose. The setup: living room with full bar, modern furniture, subdued lighting. Bedroom with large bed visible from observation post. Bathroom also monitored. Hidden observation room behind two-way mirrors. Recording equipment, cameras, audio recorders. Storage for drugs: LSD, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, various pharmaceuticals. Props: sex toys, pornography, various items to encourage uninhibited behavior. The two-way mirrors were key. They looked like normal mirrors from the apartment side, but were transparent from the observation room. CIA agents could watch everything that happened while remaining invisible. The women. White recruited prostitutes from San Francisco's Tenderloin district. Some knew they were working for the federal government. Some were told they were helping with narcotics investigations. Few understood the full scope of what was happening. They were paid by the CIA, around $100 per session, equivalent to about $1,000 today. They were given immunity from prostitution charges, and they were instructed to: 1. Approach men in bars and clubs. 2. Bring them back to the apartment. 3. Prepare drinks from the well-stocked bar. 4. Add drugs to the drinks, usually LSD, but sometimes other substances. 5. Engage in sexual activity while the men were under the influence. 6. Keep the men at the apartment for several hours. 7. Never reveal that they were being observed or drugged. The women were essentially CIA assets. One later testified, "I didn't really understand what was going on. I just knew I was working for some kind of government agency, making good money and wouldn't get arrested." The subjects. Who were the targets, according to declassified documents and testimony? Random men picked up in bars, the majority. Johns who approached the prostitutes on the street. Occasionally, people with security clearances to test their resistance to interrogation. Foreign nationals visiting San Francisco. men from various socioeconomic backgrounds. Most were completely innocent. They thought they were having a consensual encounter with a prostitute. They had no idea they were being drugged, no idea they were being watched, no idea they were part of a CIA experiment. The doses of LSD given were often massive, far more than recreational users would take. Men would experience terrifying hallucinations, paranoia, and ego dissolution while engaged in intimate acts, all while strangers watched and recorded. What White observed. From his observation post, George White would sit with a pitcher of martinis, watching through the two-way mirror and taking notes. His reports to the CIA described how quickly the LSD took effect, how it affected sexual performance and behavior, whether subjects became more talkative or suggestible, how they responded to questions. The prostitutes were sometimes instructed to interrogate, unusual behaviors, paranoid reactions or breakdowns, long-term effects if subjects were brought back multiple times. White's notes were clinical but also often crude and joking. He clearly enjoyed the work. In one letter, he boasted about watching the most interesting and varied sexual behavior and called it the most fun I've ever had. The experiments continued for nearly a decade. Hundreds, possibly thousands of men were drugged without consent. But what were the CIA actually hoping to learn? And Section 3. The goals. What was the CIA testing? Operation Midnight Climax wasn't just about voyeurism or White's personal entertainment. It had specific objectives within the larger MKUltra program. Objective 1. LSD as a truth serum. The primary goal was to determine if LSD could break down psychological defenses and make subjects more willing to reveal secrets. The sexual context was deliberate. The CIA believed that people in intimate, vulnerable situations might be more susceptible to the drug's effects. The theory was that LSD plus sexual activity would create a state of extreme vulnerability where subjects would lose inhibitions completely, become unable to maintain lies or cover stories, reveal sensitive information involuntarily, be susceptible to post-hypnotic suggestion. Did it work? Not really. LSD made subjects confused, paranoid, and often unable to communicate coherently. It didn't create compliant truth-tellers. It created terrified, hallucinating people who often couldn't answer simple questions. Objective 2. Blackmail potential. Another goal was to determine if drugging and photographing people in compromising positions could be used for blackmail. This was particularly relevant for foreign nationals or people with security clearances. The CIA wanted to know, could drugged subjects be photographed without realizing it? Would they remember what happened? Could the threat of exposure be used to turn them into assets? This objective was more successful, not because the LSD worked as planned, but because the photographs themselves were compromising regardless of whether the subject was drugged. Objective 3. Observing uninhibited behavior. The CIA wanted to understand how people behaved when completely uninhibited. The combination of LSD, sexual activity, and alcohol was designed to break down all social conditioning. White reported observations of aggressive behavior, paranoid reactions, extreme vulnerability, sexual behavior that subjects would normally suppress, how people responded to being in an altered state during intimate activity. The supposed intelligence value was understanding how foreign agents or targets might behave under similar conditions. The actual value is questionable. Objective 4. Testing drug combinations. Operation Midnight Climax also tested other substances beyond LSD. Marijuana to see if it made subjects more talkative. Cocaine for stimulant effects during interrogation scenarios. Heroin to create dependency and control. various barbiturates and amphetamines, combinations of drug to see synergistic effects. Some subjects were given multiple drugs over multiple visits. There was no medical monitoring, no follow-up care. If someone had a bad reaction, they were simply sent home once they could walk. For nearly 10 years, this went on. But like all secret operations, it eventually came to light. Not because of whistleblowers or investigative journalism, but because of one congressional investigation that pulled at a thread. Operation Midnight Climax officially ended in 1965, though some MKUltra activities continued until 1973. George White retired from the CIA and Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He kept his secrets. The safe houses were closed. The prostitutes went back to their lives. The drugged men never knew what had happened to them. And that would have been the end of the story, except for a bureaucratic decision in 1973 that would expose everything. The 1973 Destruction Order. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms, facing increased congressional scrutiny, ordered the destruction of all MKUltra files. He wanted to eliminate any evidence of the program before investigators could find it. Thousands of documents were shredded or burned. But Helms made a crucial mistake. Some MKUltra financial records had been misfiled in a budget archive. They weren't labeled MKUltra, so they escaped destruction. These documents were boring budget spreadsheets and receipts, but they showed payments to George White, rental costs for apartments in San Francisco, payments to women, costs for drugs and equipment. The Church Committee. In 1975, following the Watergate scandal and growing distrust of government, Senator Frank Church led a committee investigating intelligence agency abuses. The Church Committee examined CIA, FBI, and NSA activities that violated Americans' rights. Investigators discovered the misfiled MKUltra financial records. They started asking questions. Why was the CIA renting apartments in San Francisco? Why were they paying prostitutes? What were these drug purchases for? The CIA was forced to admit that MKUltra existed, but with most files destroyed, they claimed they couldn't provide details. CIA Director William Colby testified that the program had involved testing drugs and chemicals, including LSD, but insisted that it had been shut down and that records were incomplete. John Marks and the search for the Manchurian Candidate. Investigative journalist John Marks obtained the surviving MKUltra documents through Freedom of Information Act requests. In 1979, he published The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, which exposed many MKUltra subprojects, including Operation Midnight Climax. Mark's book revealed the existence of CIA safe houses used for drug testing, George White's role, and his gleeful attitude toward the work, the use of prostitutes to lure subjects, the lack of consent or medical supervision, the destruction of records to hide evidence. The victims come forward. After Mark's book, some victims began to realize what had happened to them. Men who'd had terrifying experiences in the 1950s and 60s, strange encounters with women followed by horrific hallucinations, suddenly understood they'd been drugged by the CIA. But proving it was nearly impossible. The records were destroyed. The prostitutes were hard to track down. George White had died in 1975, taking many secrets to his grave. The CIA admitted the program existed but claimed inability to identify specific victims. Legal attempts at justice. Several lawsuits were filed. 1979, a group of MKUltra victims sued for compensation. 1980s, multiple individual cases were filed. Result: most were settled out of court for small amounts with non-disclosure agreements. The CIA's strategy was to admit the program existed but deny details. They claimed records were destroyed, so individual victims couldn't be identified. The program was ended decades ago. Modern oversight prevents such abuses. Settlements should be minimal given the time elapsed. Victims received between $50,000 and $100,000 each, a fraction of what they deserved. And that was only victims who could prove their involvement, which was nearly impossible given the destroyed records. George White, the mastermind behind Operation Midnight Climax, never faced justice, but his personal papers, discovered after his death, revealed just how much he enjoyed the work. After George White died in 1975, his widow donated his personal papers to Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Researchers examining these papers were shocked by what they found. The letters. White had maintained correspondence with his CIA handler, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who headed MKUltra. These letters, written in the 1950s and 60s, reveal White's attitude toward his work. From a 1971 letter to Gottlieb, "I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, cheat, steal, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" In another letter, "I certainly hope that LSD experiments will be resumed because there are many interesting possibilities with this drug." The journals. White kept detailed journals of his observations. Unlike the sanitized reports sent to CIA headquarters, these personal notes revealed his true attitude. He referred to subjects as guinea pigs. He joked about men's reactions to the drugs. He described sexual acts in crude terms. He showed no empathy for subjects having terrifying experiences. He complained when subjects didn't react as expected. He expressed frustration that funding was eventually cut. In one entry, he described a subject having a complete psychological breakdown while drugged and engaged with a prostitute. White's only comment: "Interesting manifestation of the drug's effects. Subject proved useless for further testing." The photographs. White took photographs, not just for CIA records but personal souvenirs. Some showed the safe houses, some showed the prostitutes, some showed subjects' faces blurred in later releases. These weren't clinical documentation, they were trophies. No remorse. What's most disturbing about White's papers is the complete lack of remorse. Even decades later, with MKUltra exposed and condemned, White described it as the best time of his life. He showed no concern for the men who'd been drugged, no acknowledgement that he'd violated their rights, no recognition that what he'd done was wrong. In his final letter to Gottlieb before his death, White wrote, "It was the most fun I ever had." But Operation Midnight Climax wasn't the only CIA safe house operation. Across the country, similar programs were running, and some were even more extreme. Operation Midnight Climax was shocking, but it was just one small part of MKUltra's sprawling network of unethical experiments. The university experiments. The CIA funded LSD research at major universities including Harvard, Dr. Timothy Leary's experiments, though Leary later broke with the CIA. Stanford, studies on students and volunteers. University of Illinois, testing on psychiatric patients. McGill University, Dr. Ewan Cameron's horrific psychic driving experiments. The university experiments had the veneer of legitimate research, but subjects were often deceived about the drugs they were given or the purposes of the studies. The prison experiments. Prisoners were considered ideal test subjects, captive, powerless, and expendable. MKUltra funded experiments at Lexington, Kentucky. Addicts were given LSD and other drugs for weeks at a time. Vacaville, California. Prisoners were dosed with massive amounts of LSD. Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Similar drug studies. Prisoners were sometimes told participation would reduce their sentences. Some volunteered for money. few understood what they were consenting to. The hospital experiments. Mental patients were experimented on across multiple institutions. Boston Psychopathic Hospital, patients given LSD without consent. Mount Sinai Hospital, New York, terminal cancer patients dosed with LSD to study death and dying. Various VA hospitals, veterans with PTSD were given LSD to treat their trauma. In many cases, patients' conditions worsened. Some committed suicide. Medical records were often falsified or destroyed. The Assassin Program. One of MKUltra's most disturbing goals was creating Manchurian candidates, assassins who would kill on command and then forget they'd done it. Experiments included hypnosis combined with drugs, creating dissociative states, attempting to program violent behavior, testing whether subjects could be made to kill. There's no evidence these experiments succeeded, but not for lack of trying. Subjects were sometimes put into situations designed to trigger violent responses while drugged. The death of Frank Olson. Dr. Frank Olson was a CIA scientist working on biological weapons. In 1953, his colleagues spiked his drink with LSD without his knowledge. Olson had a bad reaction, becoming paranoid and depressed. 9 days later, he fell from a hotel window in New York. For decades, the CIA claimed it was suicide. In 1975, the government admitted he'd been dosed with LSD. In 1994, Olson's body was exhumed. The forensic examination suggested murder. He'd been struck on the head before going out the window. Olson likely knew too much about MKUltra and other programs. His death may have been an assassination disguised as a drug-induced suicide. Operation Midnight Climax ended in 1965. MKUltra was officially terminated in 1973. George White died in 1975. So why does this matter today? The precedent it set. Operation Midnight Climax established that the CIA believed it could conduct experiments on American citizens without consent, break any law in the name of national security, destroy evidence of wrongdoing, avoid accountability through classification and secrecy. That precedent didn't die with MKUltra. It continues in Post 9/11 torture programs, enhanced interrogation, warrantless surveillance programs, drone strikes on American citizens abroad, CIA black sites. The logic is the same. National security justifies anything, and the public doesn't need to know. The victims never recovered. Many men who were drugged in Operation Midnight Climax never fully recovered. Some developed long-term psychological issues, PTSD, paranoia, depression. Some had flashbacks or drug-induced psychosis years later. Some became substance abusers, trying to recreate or understand their experience. Most never received proper treatment because they didn't know what had been done to them. The small financial settlements some received decades later couldn't undo the damage. Many died without ever understanding why they'd had those terrifying experiences. The prostitutes were used and discarded. The women who worked for George White were also victims. They were put in dangerous situations. Some subjects became violent on LSD, exposed to diseases without protection, complicit in crimes they didn't fully understand, given no psychological support or follow-up, abandoned when the program ended. Some continued in sex work. Some struggled with substance abuse. All carried the knowledge of what they'd done, unable to talk about it due to the classified nature of the program. The unanswered questions. Despite investigations, many questions remain. How many people were actually drugged? Estimates range from hundreds to thousands. Were any foreign nationals killed or permanently damaged? What happened to the films and photographs? Most were supposedly destroyed, but some researchers believe copies exist. Were any of the techniques actually used in the field? Did any other safe houses exist that we don't know about? The destruction of records means we'll probably never have full answers. The CIA claims that MKUltra-style experiments couldn't happen today because of oversight, ethics boards, and whistleblower protections. But is that true? Enhanced interrogation. After 9/11, the CIA developed enhanced interrogation techniques that included waterboarding, simulated drowning, sleep deprivation for days, stress positions, confinement in boxes, sensory deprivation. Psychologists were paid millions to develop these techniques. The CIA claimed they weren't torture. The Senate Intelligence Committee later concluded they were torture and didn't produce reliable intelligence. This is the same logic that justified MKUltra. National security emergency, plus claim that techniques aren't really torture equals permission to experiment on human beings. The surveillance state. Edward Snowden revealed that the NSA was conducting mass surveillance on Americans without warrants, exactly what the Church Committee investigation was supposed to prevent. The parallels to MKUltra. Operated in secret for years. Violated constitutional rights. Used national security as justification. Leaders lied to Congress about it. When exposed, minimal accountability. Black sites. The CIA operated secret prisons in foreign countries where suspects were held without trial, without lawyers, and without oversight. Some detainees were subjected to experimental interrogation techniques. This is similar to Operation Midnight Climax's logic. Conduct illegal activities in locations where oversight is impossible, then claim plausible deniability. The culture hasn't changed. The fundamental problem with Operation Midnight Climax wasn't one rogue agent. It was a culture within intelligence agencies that believed the ends justify the means. National security trumps individual rights. Secrecy prevents accountability. Elite experts know better than the public. Laws apply to other people, not to us. That culture hasn't been reformed. It's been rebranded. Today, you can walk past 225 Chestnut Street in San Francisco. It's a normal apartment building in a nice neighborhood. There's no plaque, no marker, nothing to indicate that in this building. The CIA once operated a brothel where they drugged American citizens and watched them through two-way mirrors. George White's observation posts are gone. The prostitutes are mostly dead or disappeared. The men who were drugged are in their 80s and 90s now, if they're still alive. Most never knew what happened to them. Those who figured it out received small settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The CIA admitted Operation Midnight Climax existed. They apologized, sort of. They claimed they destroyed the records, so full accountability was impossible. They insisted that modern oversight prevents such abuses. But the mindset that created Operation Midnight Climax, the belief that intelligence agencies can do anything in the name of national security, that hasn't changed. It just wears a different disguise now. In the 1950s, it was, we need to match Soviet mind control. In the 2000s, it was, we need to stop terrorism. The enemy changes. The justification changes. But the willingness to violate rights, to experiment on people, to operate in secret and destroy evidence, that remains constant. Operation Midnight Climax should have been impossible. A democratic society with constitutional protections and rule of law shouldn't allow secret police to drug citizens and watch them have sex. But it happened, for 10 years, with approval from the highest levels. And when it was exposed, what changed? A few reforms, a few apologies. Some destroyed records. And then the cycle continued with new programs, new justifications, new secrets. The safe houses are closed. The two-way mirrors are gone. George White is dead, having died believing he'd done important patriotic work. But somewhere in a classified facility, there are probably people right now using the same logic that White used. That national security justifies anything, that some people's rights don't matter, that secrets can protect us from accountability. The address was 225 Chestnut Street. The code name was Operation Midnight Climax. The crime was drugging American citizens without consent and treating them as lab rats. The files say declassified, but the mindset, that's still classified, still operational, still waiting for the next emergency that will justify the next Operation Midnight Climax. Only next time it might not be LSD and brothels. It might be AI surveillance and digital manipulation. But the victims will still be unwitting, the observers will still be hidden, and the justification will still be, trust us, it's for national security.